G'day there guys, it's your Aussie Hubby Markee, back at it again with another r/AssholeTax video. Now if you love me like I love you, then you know what to do. I want you to mosey on over to that old like button and tackle it like bloody Steve Irwin with a crocodile. Maybe even chuck an Aussie flag down in the comments. Now with that said, I want you to sit back, relax, chuck a prawn on the barbie, and get ready for some bloody good AssholeTax content. Our first post today is by user AussieB23, titled, "Dealership tried to scam me on my car and gets what's coming." So about a week ago, I was in the market for a new car. I already had a 4-year-old car, so the plan was to trade in my old car and roll over the equity into a new one. I searched online and found the exact car that I wanted, so I called the dealership and scheduled a time for the test drive. After the test drive, we began to discuss the financial terms of the new car loan. Always go to dealerships pre-approved. And also the trade-in amount for my old car. Going into my trade-in, I did my homework. I found out that the fair market price for my car was $10,000 private party and around $8,000 on a trade-in. The dealership ran their numbers and came back to me with an offer for $6,400. On the evaluation, they put the lowest trim and options on my old car, while also putting that the car was in fair condition instead of good or excellent, which I can honestly attest to. Obviously, I put up a fight with the offer, and eventually the sales manager came out to explain the low offer, citing COVID-19, his mother's gallbladder, and a bunch of other excuses. I really wanted the new car, so I sucked it up and decided to move forward, as I was still able to roll over a few $1,000s towards my new car. At last, the contract signing comes around, and I get put with this smooth-talking finance guy, who attempted to upsell me on a bunch of useless warranties that were exorbitantly priced. When I was finally able to look at the contract, the pricing for my trade-in was listed at $7,200, not $6,400. I verify with the finance guy, and he confirmed the $7,200 price. I sign, he signs, and the documents are processed. A few moments pass, and from the other room I hear him talking to the sales manager about how the car pricing was wrong on the contract, $800 my favor. From what I overheard, they listed their internal price on the contract, meaning all the things they told me previously was complete bullcrap and they were trying to stiff me. The finance guy comes back to me and says that the contract was void because the pricing was wrong and that we'll have to fill out a new set of documents. Immediately, I knew he was full of crap. In college, I took an extensive legal contracts course, taught by an attorney, and the one thing that was beat into our heads was the requirement for 2 parties to make a contract legal, and that it also takes both parties to void a contract. The dealership screwed up, and then tried to trick me into voiding the contract. I simply refused and cited the legal requirements to void a contract. The finance guy then began to argue with me, saying how it wasn't fair to the dealership that I was getting more money for my car, and how I should do the right thing, meaning that I should just bend right over and let them rip me off on my trade-in. Obviously, I refused, and the dealership had no choice but to let me go on my merry way, in my new car with $800 more in my pocket. Our next post is by user Slytherin Rabbit, titled, "Put up a noise device to stop teenagers without thinking through the consequences. Good luck going broke." This is about one of those sound devices that emits a high-pitched noise. It's supposed to keep teenagers away from certain areas as it hurts their ears, but older people can't hear it. Apparently, I'm 26 and I can still hear them, so I call BS on that. It hurts, and I refuse to patronize any business that uses them. I grew up in a relatively affluent, northern English village 2 miles walk from a private school. We call them public schools in the UK, which seems to confuse other nationalities. The village had a local shop, which was much more expensive than the Tesco's 10 minutes drive away, but was popular with the locals. Much of their clientele was the locals, which were mostly well-off retired people, stay-at-home mothers and children from the school, many of whom were wealthy Chinese students who thought nothing of spending a load of cash on snacks. My family is moderately well off. I was one of the poorest kids at the school. On nice days, some of us older children who lived in the village, it was a boarding or day school, and about 6 of us teenagers were day pupils who lived in the village, would walk home from school, as it was a lovely walk that took us through the fields and along the riverbank, and this was a low crime area, so our parents allowed this. We would often get a drink and ice cream from the shop on our way past. We stopped doing this when the shop owner, who I shall call Karen, who never had issues with us before, suddenly decided she objected to teenagers, and followed us around the shop to make sure we weren't stealing, and yelled at us for loitering when we stopped to unwrap our ice lollies, and put the wrapping in the bin outside the shop. So we decided if she didn't want us in her shop, we wouldn't go. A few weeks after this, several mothers were surprised to find their young children started crying when they walked past. Their ears hurt and they were too young to articulate this. Others found their dogs wouldn't stop barking in the vicinity of the shop. One of my friends had the idea it was a sonic device when she heard about it and mentioned it to her mother, who apparently confronted Karen, who smugly admitted it. She thought it was very clever to keep teenagers out. There were 6 teenagers in this village. Even if we were being difficult, and we weren't, it was overkill, when she could have complained directly to our parents. It did keep us teenagers out, but this went around the village quickly, like any small community. The mothers whose young children had been reduced to tears were furious. Anyone with a child or dog automatically stopped shopping there to avoid causing pain to the child or dog. I would estimate 75% of the village had a dog and didn't shop there when alone because they were angry at Karen for causing that pain. The woman who lived next to the shop called the police because her children couldn't use their garden as the sound travelled. Karen was ordered to take it down, as the sound reached private property, not because it was causing pain to children, which still bothers me, and she was fined quite a lot. I think it was like £10,000. But this was 10 years ago, and I may be misremembering. I know she didn't take it down when first asked politely, often the first step before police take action, and they had to force her, and then there was some back and forth, but I wasn't privy to the details. The device was gone, but no one went back to the shop. She had been so hostile and smug about her brilliant idea, ignoring complaints from parents and dog owners, that no one wanted to give her money. The shop became a ghost town for a month or so, then she shut down. And then she got drunk and ranted at the town fate about how no one supported local businesses anymore. She was a normal person until this happened though. It's weird. As for the teenagers thing, she had known us for years, so the sudden 180 was weird. I would have blamed the boarding students instead, but they were escorted by a teacher when they came once a week. Edit. In answer to some comments, this didn't happen overnight. There were 3 or 4 days before people realized what was happening, and then another few weeks, maybe a month, before she was forced to remove the device. She was asked nicely first and refused. It took time to get the relevant paperwork to force her to do it. Can't remember the details here. While she insisted she was right. Then at no point did she apologize to the lady next door, and she rather doubled down. All in all, it took around 4 or 5 months for the business to fold. This was not instant. She had time to either explain the sudden 180, if there was a valid reason, or to apologize. Edit 2. Yes, in British English, public and private schools are the same thing. What the Americans call public school, we call state schools. I googled it. Apparently it was because the public name refers to the school's origins, as schools open to any public citizen who could afford to pay the fees. They are not funded from public taxes. It's an old thing, but most Brits now use private/public/independent interchangeably when talking about these schools. Edit 3. I mentioned this to one of my old friends, and he reminded me that one of our other friends saw a gap in the market from the students who stopped going to the shop, as their ears hurt, and started bulk buying stuff at Tesco's at the weekend and selling them to the boarding students for inflated prices. Apparently, he made £2,000 before he was caught, and this was 10 years ago. It was also bizarre because the school started taking the boarding students to Tesco instead. They could have literally bought the same food for a third of the price. I've been lucky never to really struggle for money. I've never been super rich, but I've never had to worry about food or shelter or university costs, which makes me luckier than most. But that wasting of money just blows my mind. My dad grew up super poor and built his own business from nothing. He always made my sister and I appreciate the value of things. I have some stories about some of the wealthier boarders that may make good r/entitled people fodder. And our next post is by user MMFQDeath, titled, company I used to work for gets hacked for $45,000. So a little background. My last job and I have had some issues in the past. I worked in IT at a family-owned company. A basic rundown of what happened was, my girlfriend had to go to the hospital and we share a car. Something didn't get done the day it was supposed to because of a network outage, and the boss decided that me coming in early the next day wasn't good enough and fired me. Now, when I say I worked in IT, I mean I got paid barely anything. I also worked as a web designer, network security analyst, database manager, sales coordinator, server manager, etc. Although I only got paid $13 an hour. While I was there, the owner expressed concerns about other companies receiving ransom attacks. I told him that there were a few measures we could take, but they would add a cost to our network security budget. This was about a month before I got fired. I met with several companies, made my recommendation, and was shot down on the company I selected as the best fit due to cost. I expressed how bad of an idea it could be, and it was still shot down, and we chose a cheaper option. Which was fine because I had other measures in place to avoid it. Now, my boss, the director of IT, is a great guy. However, he's a terrible IT technician. He's always busy, answering emails, never gets anything done on time, offloaded all of his work onto me, and had me doing everything. He had no idea how to use any of the software we bought, no idea how to monitor anything, no idea how to recover from an attack, etc. When I had to leave early to get my girlfriend to the hospital for an extremely painful kidney stone, I told him I would come in 2 hours early the next day and get done before anything was there. He approved it, and I told him if he wanted to do this install, I left everything there and it would take maybe 25 minutes. Prior to this, everything was on hold for 2 days, because our entire network was down due to him causing a loop back on a network switch, which caused errors and threw everything into a panic, which I fixed. As I said, I was let go the next day. This all transpired about a year ago. So today, as I'm still friends with many of the people there, I got told about this hack. It was the exact thing the boss had been worried about. The network was hacked, all of the records and backups were deleted, all information was stolen off of the servers, and they were ransomed for $45,000, which they paid because they couldn't fix it. Now, I had offline cloud backups. I had an offline server dedicated to malware removal from networked components, etc. I had it all ready. If my boss would have taken the time to learn it, or if I was still there, I could have at least gotten the data back without paying the ransom, or prevented the attack entirely. It's a terrible thing that happened, but holy crap am I loving it. That is what they deserve. Our next post is by user DJ Osama Spin Laden, titled The Jerk Discount. When I was in high school, I worked as a cashier at a grocery store in a pretty affluent neighborhood. This meant that there was the occasional encounter with miserable, entitled, middle-aged Karens projecting the stress and inner torment of their own midlife crises onto me before they got home, and engulfed the Chardonnay and chocolate I just scanned for them. The store I worked at had a senior discount day on Thursdays, which happened to be one of the days that I worked. One day, I had a woman come through my line who was probably in her mid-50s. She wasn't senior old yet, but she was definitely getting there. She didn't respond to my hello, which I don't really care about anyways. After I scanned her things, I started scanning the stack of coupons that she brought, many of which were expired and wouldn't work. I explained this to her politely, but she wasn't having any of it. In the most awful, nasal, and patronizing voice, she starts going on a rant about how it shouldn't matter. I just got the coupons, and isn't there a way that you can just take it off yourself? My response to that was, of course, no, in the most polite way that I could. She seemed to accept defeat, but she wasn't done trying to make someone's day as bad as hers. She tells me how stupid it is that we have Halloween candy out in late November. It was on clearance, and how much better the other stores in the city were because they wouldn't do things like this, all while angrily referring to the store that I was in as you, as if I was the person in control of these things. She was almost done complaining when I remembered it was Thursday. I immediately type the code in and the words "senior discount 10% appear on the screen in front of her. Upon seeing this, her expression very quickly changed from that of a smug, entitled narcissist to someone entering the throes of an existential crisis. She turned red in the face as she put her card in and went to grab her cart. I wished her a nice evening and she left without saying a word. Moral of the story: if you want to exact revenge on a Karen, make them feel old. Our next post is by Cold Snowy Peaked, titled, "Literal Absentee DIY Landlord Tries to Screw Me Over. Loses everything he tried to game from me. Once upon a time, when I was young and single and found myself flush with a surplus of cash, I decided to embark upon single male living, and found a townhouse for rent in an HOA community that seemed like a pretty decent deal. It was a separate unit with one level that was theoretically ADA, but never got anyone to rent it. It took me 2 full years to figure out why, and it was the worst absentee landlord in the world. He was headed off to Ecuador to live full-time in this weird yoga retreat thing, and chase after Ecuadorian beach bunnies or something. Imagine every greasy, balding ponytail hippie you ever met, then add complete incompetence to that, and an inherited set of opportunities that he had slumlorded as a living, but sold off except for one unit at this HOA, his own place. Landlord had hired the property management company that managed the HOA property, maintenance, groundskeeping, etc., to rent the place, but insisted on doing the paperwork himself. Since I was the first renter he had had for this particular unit, he had lived there previously and was moving to Ecuador. He approved me, had me hand him cash for the cleaning deposit, warning, sign paperwork. That turned out wasn't the paperwork the management company needed, and then flew to his new home in Ecuador that night. He handed me the key to the townhouse and drove off in a cheap rental car, and the last thing he said to me was, "If there's a problem, I expect you to work it out with the management company. I won't be available for a month or so." At this point, klaxons should have been going off in my head. When I walked into the unit, it was trashed, like messy frat house moved out trash. I called his number, then I called the property management company and said, "This isn't cleaned at all." Back and forth went on for a good while, but it was still a house. I should have walked, but I didn't at that point. Eventually, the management company got him to admit that he left the unit trashed. I wouldn't move in at all. I was able to show the receipt for the $600 cleaning fee he signed hurriedly for and submit that, so they waived the security deposit they would normally have required and said they would require landlord to pay it. So it all worked out. 3 months later, the jerk landlord is back in town to pare down his material possessions, i.e. sell crap he left behind. And wouldn't you know it, the water heater in the unit died. I contacted the management company, they contacted him, and he said, "I'll take care of it." He showed up one day, broke the lock getting in. His rationale was that he owned the place so he could break the lock if he wanted to, without putting a 24-hour notice up that he was going to be working on it. I got a call at work from a neighbor and drove home as fast as I could to find jerk landlord sputtering as the new water heater ruined 2 bookshelves worth of hardback books and rare board games. At that point, I had already called the management company, and they not only had photographs of the jerk landlord's screw-up, but also took him aside and told him I could prosecute him for criminal trespassing. I was furious, but landlord promised he'd get money from his insurance company to fix everything, and I'd get replacements for my stuff. Guess what never happened? I eventually rebuilt my collection, but at that point, I was done with him entirely, and more or less demanded that the property management company be the only ones involved. Oddly enough, they were pretty much on that too. When I decided to move closer to my work, taking me up for an hour to get home driving by car to less than 5 minutes by bicycle, I was torn because frankly, once I'd figured this jerk's modus operandum for the rental, I could do pretty much whatever, so long as he got his check. He never checked email, so if there was an issue, I went through the management company, and inevitably they just said, "Go ahead and take care of it, busted appliance, etc., and take it off the rent." He always sent screaming emails, threatening to evict me if he didn't get his full rent payment because he had a crappy building. but I was on a long-term lease of 2 years and had locked in what was then above average pricing for the building, but as it went on was something like 1/3 of the rent in my area for my place. The $200 jump in monthly rent was one thing, but if I was honest about everything, saving $200 a month in rent meant I was spending 2 hours a day in traffic and $150 more in the gas. The new place meant I could walk pretty much anywhere. On top of that, dealing with the jerk landlord over the internet for the past 2 years was too much, and I knew he'd try to jack my rent up $300 above what the place was worth the minute that 2 years was up, which was about what I was going to pay for the new place. And the bastard still hadn't given me the money for my books and games that he had ruined. So I made sure to send in the notification exactly on time as per his instructions to the property management company, who at this point knew me and knew what was likely to happen when I moved out. And true to form, he did exactly what we all expected him to do. He attempted to claim the cleaning deposit as security, and then said I would have to pay for the damage I caused due to my negligence with the water heater and pay to have the unit recarpeted. There was no carpet anywhere in the house because part of the reason he didn't want to pay for cleaning was because he tore up all the carpet from my unit before I moved in, and then decided he could just paint the floor instead. Unfortunately, it was an old hardwood floor and not the subfloor. I had all of his shenanigans documented to a fare thee well. I had signed a document from the landlord along with a signed letter indicating that it was due to his incompetence, as well as the notification and photographs of the damage he had caused trying to fix something outside of his experience. I even had a photograph of him with water spraying him in the face because he tried to solder copper pipe, and when that didn't work, he tried to duct tape it shut. To be clear, I did absolutely no work on his property whatsoever. I called the property management company that he had hired to do all the work, and when he screwed up installing the water heater in my unit and had ruined the carpet as well as a bunch of my stuff, I called his insurance agency because he was living in Ecuador and couldn't be bothered to deal with his properties other than to collect a rent check. So when he pulled his now infamous bullcrap, I was able to trot out all the documentation on the property management company and I had kept. And I still had a copy of the insurance claim I had filed with the full list of ruined property and the total he signed and dated that he had in fact collected money from. By this time, I had already moved out everything out of the units except for a cheap old laptop, a folding table, a chair I found in the alleyway, and my cleaning supplies, because I was working from home for a week while packing up my crap and moving out. I sent him an email with the management company CC'd, but also CC'd a friend of mine who worked at a law firm at the time, as the front desk receptionist, but the domain was a well-known law firm in my city and had handled the landlord's divorce once upon a time. The email, in legal terms but TLDR, said, "So should I send this letter of demand to the insurance company? Because I'm confused, and as I recall, you still owe me somewhere between $1,000 and $1,200 in my personal property damages you never paid due to your mishandling of the water heater installation, and thus the full list of other landlord bullcrap. Should I contact your company and insurance agent as per your standing instructions?" 5 minutes after I sent that email, I got a call from the property management company saying that they would take care of everything from that point on, and that if I hadn't heard from them by Thursday, to expect couriered documents on Friday morning. Friday morning, I woke up to a courier hand-delivering me a $4,250 check and an itemized receipt for everything the landlord had tried to screw me over for. It included the cleaning fee, but surprisingly also the standard security deposit and the owed money for damages that he had received from the insurance company but never paid me, and a full refund of my last month's rent. I found out about 4 years later that the HOA had a lien on the property for about a year, but couldn't start foreclosure until I moved out, so they backdated me and refunded my rent check. Turns out jerk landlord was pocketing the rent, but hadn't paid utilities or HOA dues for 6 months, which was handled through property management company. So, the HOA foreclosed on his unit. The property management company got 15%, and the place sold for $600,000 after they hired a condo flipper. I get the impression they were all just sitting there, hovering, waiting for me to hand over the keys to the property management company, and then the minute I was out of the door, they were filing paperwork and lawsuits saying, "Go, go, go, get the renter completely clear of this, no liens, no liens." Because if I could have shown that the owner still owed me any money at all, I could have theoretically tied up the repo of the unit. Jerk landlord tried to sue them, but for some reason didn't want to leave Ecuador. I'd like to imagine it was a warrant for his arrest for insurance fraud, but still. Anyway guys, this has been Markee. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of r/AssholeTax. Tell me what you thought of it down in the comments below. I'd love to know your thoughts, opinions, anything that's on your mind. What have you been up to today? I hope you've had a good day, night, sleep, whatever you're up to, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.